There are many things in this world which makes us raise an eyebrow, or perhaps question the existence of. But what if one of those things is not only well documented for centuries, but are said to be spoken about in the Bible or the Quran, involving King Solomon working with or possibly even enslaving to give him almost superpowers over his kingdom? Probably one of the most misunderstood, feared, and adored is the race of the Jinn or genie. From the fabled Arabian Nights tales to the tamer version of Walt Disney's Aladdin, they seem to merge and cross over in our realm nonetheless. Join us tonight if you dare, as we talk about the race of the Jinn.
From a child born into this world, we are taught what to believe. Closed-minded we become, fearful to be deceived. Still we desire to know what lies beyond that locked door. The art of the storyteller, conjuring tales of legend and lore. History hidden, lost knowledge, things forgotten and the unknown. These are the things that direct us and will set the tone. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
Now, the word genie will forever, in my heart, be immortalized by none other than Disney's creation of Aladdin.
Well, I mean, Disney steals every idea. They didn't create Aladdin.
Very well. You know, the little blue character that we've all come to know and love, and voiced by the immortal Robin Williams. And secondly, at least for some, I believe it beckons back to a book, Arabian Nights, also known as 1001 Nights, which was a collage of Arabian stories. Truthfully, however, in this research, I found out, the Arabian Nights, first off, is a book from the early 18th century. It's best documented account, I think, that we have at least discovered so far on the Jinn, and that's where we draw a lot of our early history. But did you know the genies, or the Jinn, actually date back prior to the time of Christ, all the way back to the 3rd century BC?
They were very well known in Arabic mythology in general, and the belief in Jinn was incredibly common in pre-Islamic Arabia. So yeah, I mean, this goes way, 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 way back.
Mm-hmm. Now, spellings are as different as the varied stories. You can have genie, Genie, the Jinn, Jinn, or the slightly different version with a D in the front, Djinn, and then it goes on to even more kind of strange spellings would be Gny, Jny, or even a Ginnaya. So wrap your minds around that.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to recognize that word, and for most Western people, I would say we look at genie and we think of the 3 wishes and
rubbing the
Aladdin's lamp and all that.
Yeah.
But really, when you start looking at Jinn, it encompasses a wide variety of different invisible beings that are said to inhabit the world along with humanity. Not considered innately good or evil, they have the ability to pick their path.
Much like a human.
In Christian faith, you look at demons and devils and they're bad. Those are bad things. But Jinn actually have the ability to practice religion. Mm-hmm. They have the ability, they have families, they live in tribal structures much as we do.
They eat, they sleep, they die.
Eat, sleep, they can be killed. They are acknowledged as being more powerful than humans in general, stronger, faster. I believe the original wording is they are beings of smokeless flame by nature, but they can have thin and subtle bodies. That would be a description of one type of Jinn, as I discovered in my research, which I sort of knew, but I wasn't, I didn't understand. There are multiple classifications of Jinn.
Yeah, I will say, in all honesty, I thought I understood the Jinn until I really started diving into this, and like a lot of our stories, it's like an onion with many different layers.
Yeah, the Jinn can change their shape at will, typically. They favor the forms of snakes. They can appear as scorpions, lizards, or humans, and have been known to have sexual relationships with humans even.
Mm.
And some of this, some powers vary by classification of Jinn, and I think we'll get to that later on. They have been known to have the ability to take control of a person's body. Now, typically...
Possession, yes.
Yeah, typically, that person has to be on board with that. They can't just force themselves in. This person must be sort of predisposed to the idea of it. However, I think there are situations where they can force it. And if they get hurt, they will seek out revenge. And that includes maybe possessing the one who wronged them. And like demons and devils, the exorcism rite can expel them from the body. So they have a fear of iron, which I found interesting. Like the
come across that as well, yes.
And apparently wolves. So
well, and I found in one story that in the shape-shifting aspect, that was another source that they did change into. So that's kind of a contradictory. They're afraid of a wolf, but yet in another story version, they might take the form of a wolf. I guess what I'm trying to say is tonight, bear with us, because we're going to try to decipher literally thousands of years of myth and legends. Tracing the history of the Jinn is a gigantic task that offers very little in the way of definitive answers, and it's difficult to really locate a reliable or constant source, partially because we're literally digging through thousands of years of stories, and a lot of those were passed on orally for many, many years before they were ever published. Now, early origins, I have, the Jinn was supposedly created by God or gods out of fire and scorching wind, as you said, of smokeless flame, giving them a certain wispy, changeable forms. This is in contrast, obviously, to humans, who were sculpted supposedly by mud and clay, making us firm and solid and obviously not so changeable or mysterious. The race of the Jinn is filled with different categories or classes of spirits. The three main ones, and I believe, as Bill and I were pre-talking before the podcast, there's several layers, but the three major would include the Shaitan, which is the proposed inspiration for Satan himself, very rebellious. And then we have the Ifrit, or Ifrit, partially or particularly strong and a cunning type of Jinn. And then the most extreme, powerful, and dangerous is the Marid. In ancient stories, the Marid Jinns are usually the ones that we found imprisoned in bottles or rings or vessels to be controlled for all their power. Now, one thing I have always heard, and I have to pull back, I have even used this in conversation with people, is Jinn in the Bible. And I mentioned this, kind of touched upon it in the opening. I think we need to try to clear up some of that misconception. First off, the word Jinn or genie, those words in the Christian faith in the Bible is not mentioned. However, some will refute to say it's referenced by the translation and interpretation of the word demon, devil, or spirit, which the word Jinn actually does mean. Now, bear with me on this. Some of these are a bit earth-shattering, but there's some scholarly reasons of why we think the word or spelling of Jinn is not in the Bible. One belief is the Bible and the Quran were both, copied, and only select stories, scriptures, and books were chosen to be shared by the influence of man or king, as the case may be. While this theory may be new for some, it has become, I think, pretty evident, especially in past centuries, with the discovery of several additional books, many written by women, which were not selected for whatever reason to be included. If you would consider just for a moment that the Bible was indeed compiled with man's intervention, therefore maybe the word Jinn was omitted by man, as well as other details, and it was quick to point out, why are there dinosaurs not mentioned in the Bible? Or what about the details of the races that Cain, son of Adam and Eve, that he married and mated with? Where were those details? Now, secondly, maybe God himself just decided not to include the race of the Jinn, as yet another representation of the word demon or devil was enough to suffice. And third, and I loved this one, maybe the Jinn themselves, with all their mighty power, just decided to remain unmentioned. After all, part of the meaning of the name is to be hidden. So who really knows? This debate has went on for years and probably will continue. We definitely, we don't want to lure anyone astray from their faith, their own beliefs regarding religion, just trying to explain some of the proposed reasons and excuses. But I was one of those that had heard for many years that, the Jinn are in the Bible, and it's actually, they're in the Quran that talks about King Solomon.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. I talked about the Jinn having the ability to make choices and they're not being innately good and evil. And like you said, they practice religion, speaking of religion. Mm-hmm. And they practice, it includes Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and they're usually, like, I think in the Eastern world, Like, they typically have their own thoughts on which jinn or which. Like, Muslim jinn are usually thought to be benign and sort of, they don't involve themselves in the affairs of men. Christian and Jewish jinn are usually indifferent unless you anger them, and then they're gonna go after you. And then the pagan jinn are considered to be evil and untrustworthy.
The naughtiest. Now, we mentioned the Quran. I think we need to take that a step further. The original genie or jinn was, of course, referenced as being different color of skin, stemming from the hazy past of ancient Arabian paganism. Muslim tradition enriched the jinn's profile by adding to it features derived from demons who inhabited Jewish and Christian lore, as well as more exotic South Asian, African civilizations in which Islam had penetrated and started to cross over. The Quran, obviously Islam's sacred scripture, mentions the jinn actually on several occasions. For example, the Quran relates that King Solomon, master of the languages of all creatures, and allowed him to be the regiment of hosts of humans and birds and jinns, actually as stated, under his command, through the mystical and magical power of a ring that he is said to have obtained from the archangel Michael. This enabled him influence over what some now state to be the race of the jinn. This echoes of legends and how the wise monarch exercised dominion over the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and associated demons and supernatural spirits. The Quran also records stories of how Solomon harnessed the power of demons, or jinns in this instance, for his ambitious and demanding construction projects. And we've all heard of King Solomon's temple, King Solomon's mines. They made for him what he pleased, of fortress and images, it states. Also, bowls as large as water troughs and cooking pots that could not be moved from their place. I think it's this mixture of different faiths and religions, familiar stories, but with word meanings evolving and translated, that I think we get some of that confusion today, where it said, the jinn's in the Bible. Well, it's not in the Christian Bible, but it definitely is in the Quran.
Well, I feel that a lot of ancient scripture is sort of man trying to understand the world around him without the knowledge that we have today. So I don't think a lot of it is meant to be taken literal. That's just my, interpretation.
Right.
So yeah, when you have a thing that we don't understand, we ascribe, the understanding that we have. So who's to say,
Right.
The devils and demons that we talk about, maybe that is just our version, our translation of that particular word.
And to that point, maybe it's words that it's the best words that could be chosen to reflect that at our current level of understanding, if that makes sense. Now, let's talk a little bit about the powers of the jinn. And I'm going to definitely reference a John Barnelli's. It's a blog that he titled The Origin of the Jinn and the Lamp. I found a lot of good reference material here, so I definitely wanted to reference him. He states the details of what powers jinns have vary greatly between the sources. They've been said to transform into wolves, birds, reptiles. It's said they can dive to the bottoms of the sea and the ocean, where they can locate pearls as large as eggs. They can vanish, teleport, and both weave magic carpets as well as command them to fly. One particular tale insists a genie created a magic carpet 27 miles in length. Would that be the first example of flying commercial plane service? I'm not sure.
Seems like a lot.
Eat your heart out, Delta and Southwest. One constant in the legend is that genies are tricksters, and they delight in playing pranks on both harmless and harmful alike. They seem to be kind of neutral to that aspect. They can also change their appearance at will, owing their creation out of fire or wind. They do seem to follow some patterns in their choice of physical manifestations, however, favoring perfect copies or maybe slight twisted likenesses of humans, various types of animals, and hybrids of humans and animals, which kind of goes back to, we'll go back to the Dungeons and Dragons and mythology, some of the creatures, perhaps like a centaur, half man, half horse, a satyr, half goat, half man. And I think obviously this might be the first record of doppelgangers, because it talks about them where they would mimic a human, slightly twisted version, and that's where we kind of get into some of the possession and different things like that. Now, there's also, I felt this was an interesting story, a 12th century story about the Queen of Sheba. Now, she was said to have a human father and a Jinn mother. The story insisted Jinn always have thick fur on their legs and hooves like that of a donkey, no matter which form they take. I had never heard anything like this.
Well, I think this does vary by the classification of Jinn, too. The powers and their appearance. So, and that's something that I have here that we'll talk about later.
Okay. Well, this was actually used in the identification of genies, even while they were trying to disguise themselves, as it was the unmasking of the Queen of Sheba as half Jinn. If you saw someone who always hid their legs or had a suspicious amount of hair on their legs, you could be pretty sure they were a Jinn. Now, I know a couple guys that have really hairy legs. I wouldn't call them jinns, but anyhow. Is it just me, or does that kind of sound like another mythological creature like we were talking about, a satyr? But again, I hadn't personally ever come across this in my own research and what I had known. The Jinn came in every shape and size, some with hooves, some with long tails, it states, with flapping ears, some with bodiless heads, headless bodies. Just imagine a procession of disembodied heads and hairy-legged hooves creatures shambling by. It doesn't exactly want to make you go out and ask them to grant you any wishes, that's for sure.
I was touching on the different classifications of Jinn, and I found a sort of a list in a couple of places, and different lists reference different types. So these were the ones that were the most common, and sort of these were the agreed-upon descriptions. So you had first the Jinn. They were the closest to animals and typically appeared in the form of dogs. Then you have the Ghoul, which, that's a name you've heard, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But these were shape-shifting, cannibalistic, blood-drinking Jinn. They preferred to feed upon the blood and flesh of humans, especially travelers or children, as well as corpses stolen from their graves. Now, they would appear in various forms to lead people astray in the desert. And here, in Persian lore, they had the legs of a donkey and the horns of a goat. So
that's the Persian aspect. Yeah. Okay.
Jan was a shape-shifting Jinn that lived in the desert. They could appear as a whirlwind or a white camel. They considered themselves enemies of the Ghoul. They were open-minded about humans and were the first to be encountered by humans when we started meeting with Jinn and encountering them. And we're said to have the power to hide or reveal oases in the desert. So obviously that's a useful power.
Well, that goes back to a lot of the tales of the desert and the mirage of being able to find water. And
you have the Merid, which you had talked about. They're very huge and powerful, referred to as giants in a lot of stories, and described as the most powerful Jinn with the greatest of powers. They had free will, of course, but they could be compelled to perform chores, which I assume is where the genie of the lamp and the three wishes comes from. You have the Ifrit, which you talked about, which was a type of infernal Jinn that is powerful and cunning, ruthless and wicked. Was known as an enormous winged creature of fire. They typically lived in underground societies structured along ancient Arabian tribal lines. They would generally marry other Jinn, but would on occasion marry humans. And humans could use magic to enslave or kill them. And then you got some weaker varieties. You have the Shik, Shiqqq, however you would pronounce that, which was a weaker Jinn that looked sort of like a half-formed monster. And the name literally meant split in Arabic. And the artist depictions of these things was literally like half a person.
Half a person, like literally
one leg,
cut down the
one
middle?
One leg, one arm, half a head, one eye. It was
this
really
like a
weird
blob or like a,
no, they
a
could
standing
stand
person?
Upright. Yeah,
stand up on one leg kind of thing? Wow.
Then you had the Naznaz, which was another weak form of Jinn, and were usually the offspring of the Shik and humans. And they were sort of a hybrid of animal-like and human-like forms. Again, really weird-looking art for these in history. You have the Palis, Palis. These ones creeped me out when I read about them. They live in the desert, and they are known as a foot licker.
Foot licker. They
attack people and drain their blood from the body by licking the soles of their feet.
A vampire with a foot fetish.
It was, weird. They're considered to have low intellect and be easily fooled. You have the Silat, which is the smartest of the shape-shifting spirits, and they can mimic humans almost perfectly. And then you have, I'm going to use a slightly different pronunciation, Shaitan, or Shaitan. This is, in Islam, the devil is known as Iblis, or Shaitan. And this is in the Quran. And he has the power to put evil suggestions into the minds of human beings. So, revered as one of the most powerful. So there's a wide variety, which I didn't really know that when I started looking at this. I'd heard, if you play Final Fantasy games, you've heard of Merid and Ifrit and things like that. But I didn't realize that those were all part of this same family.
The race, if you will, of Jinn or whatever.
The same types of creatures.
Now, according to legends, the race of the Jinn eventually angered God, which led to their destruction. Only a small group of the most faithful were left intact. The remaining Jinn scattered across the world, only appearing to humans when they wanted to cause mischief or harm. Their cities crumbled, their culture vanished, but the Jinn themselves are still said to be around. They're just not as common or as numerous as they once were. And, of course, some would speculate that they have, as you had stated, crossed-bred with humans and might be living right alongside of us, or the whole doppelganger aspect. Now, we touched a little bit upon, but where do Jinn live? It's believed that Jinn inhabit mostly desolate deserts, caves, graveyards, and darkness itself, as it was stated.
Well, I know I read that they tried to shun the places of humanity.
Yeah. And you mentioned like the ghouls and stuff. Obviously, we've got a lot of folklore where ghouls are associated with graveyards and such. And then, of course, even with the movie Aladdin and Arabian Nights, it usually takes place out in the middle of some desolate desert or some former ruins of a mankind civilization. It's commonly believed, contrary to some accounts, that Jinn are not gods at all, but they fall, as you had said, maybe under a god or gods or deities themselves. Again, more similar to human beings than what I originally thought. I did think it was interesting, in the oldest forms of research, there's only basically the two elements that are represented. The Ifrit, or Ifrit, as we call it, more of like a fire demon type, and then, of course, the air elementals. Now, later on, I think it started coming into like video games and movies and books. It's like they tried to kind of force feed earth and water elementals into the Jinn.
Well, I know the Merid in if you look in, I think, D&D and Final Fantasy games and stuff like that, is typically associated with water.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know which one ends up being the earth elemental, but like you said, I know the Ifrit is associated with fire.
Right.
And then, they do try to kind of shoehorn it into...
It's almost like we've got to have all four, and we've got to have the four main elements. As we had talked about, Jinn are not immortal. Again, similar to humans. They, we might live to be 100 years old. Jinn, might be 1,000 years old for a life expectancy, but they still grow old. They get ill. They have afflictions. They can be wounded, the same as you or I. And because the Jinn can exist right along the side of humans, many religions, including Muslim, have a type of mutual respect for the Jinn. Especially in the Muslim faith, it's not all that uncommon to have teachings to not accidentally harm an innocent Jinn, to be, cautious and to be weary of your surroundings, and especially when you go into those desolate areas, those dark areas where the Jinn may stay. Did find reference to, and I don't know if you come across any of this or not, the 7 Jinn kings in Arabic lore. Magicians read in their books about these kings, whose names vary a lot, let me say, depending upon the source. According to one version, they were as follows, and I apologize, I will most likely butcher every one of these, but the first would be Mudhib, the second is Mira, the third is Al-Hama, the red, the fourth is Bakan, the gleaming, the fifth is Semhush, the sixth Al-Abad, the white, and the seventh is Mimmun, the lucky. Each of these 7 Jinn kings had tribes of their own of lesser Jinn that were subjects to their rule. Some of the names are still unclear in their meaning. For the example, Semhush is believed by many to have been a companion to a prophet, and some believe died long ago, like early in the 18th century, and has now been replaced by another by the name of Mut Akal, the father of bitterness, because it was like this Jinn sought revenge for the one that killed the Jinn king before them. So you can easily get wrapped around and lost in the lore with the kings and the different names there. Now, we can't talk about the genies without alluding more about the lamp and wishes. I mean, that's kind of the new modern trend in the last century, at least, that the modern century that we all kind of know and love. Most people in the West today associate genies with lamps and wishes and certain quirky magical powers. This is all largely thanks to a few pieces of popular media, including I Dream of Jeannie, the TV series, and of course Disney's version of Aladdin that we've already mentioned, both which obviously had strong ties to a magical lamp that you rubbed. Now, genies are actually supernatural creatures with an incredible past, as we said, that stretches back 5,000 years. They're described as malevolent tricksters, peaceful spirits, if you will, and everything in between. Many people today still believe they are real. They don't expect them to grant any wishes, at least not willingly, but not without some ironic consequences, for it seems the lesson to be learned is to wish from a genie most certainly can have dire consequences, that trickster aspect. Tracing the history of the Jinn is, as I said, a gigantic task with all the lore and the cultures and the vocabulary and the oral translations that's given. But if we take a brief look, the word Jinn cognates that we find some pretty tantalizing clues about genies, especially their constant relation to lamps and wishes here in the West. In the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire reached the borders of what is now modern-day Syria. Here, the people of a city of Palmyra had their own interpretation of the Jinn, and these legends that was a little different from the history that we have here. The Palmyra Jinn, spelt G-N-Y, or J-N-Y, was a spirit of sorts that watched over people, watched over their homes and their families, almost like that of a guardian angel. No curses or wishes or mischief at all, just looking out for the overall well-being of mankind. Its interpretation of that Jinn was reinforced in ancient Roman culture and would eventually make its way to the modern-day West. Now, the story of the Arabian Nights had been floated around an ancient world for hundreds or thousands of years before Europe got wind of this, when the publisher Antoine Galland brought the tales to France and saw how popular they were. Now here, he actually added a few new stories to this collection. These were reportedly relayed to him orally by a Syrian storyteller, and I'll butcher this name again, but Antun Yusuf Hana Darib, who is likely the original author or one of the original authors. What were these add-on tales? Well, of course, they were probably the most well-known to us today. Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves and Aladdin's Wonderful Lamp. These are tales most Westerners immediately associate when you hear Arabian Nights. Yet, they were written and added to the collection in a more modern era. Now, that doesn't mean they aren't fantastic tales. Of course, just that they aren't exactly ancient, depending on if you believe they were truly relayed by one of the earlier authors to Galland upon his time of publishing in the other continents. Now, the first reference to a vessel, all that being said, the references of the original manuscripts that would make up the book Arabian Nights involving lamps and even rings. In the story City of Brass, a group took out across the Sahara Desert in order to find the imprisoned King Solomon, who had a magical ring that bound the various genies to him for control. This appears to be the very first vessel or containment for the Jinn that at least I found written.
Yeah, I found reference to binding the Jinn to items and talismans and whatnot. I even found an anecdote but there was a young girl who, I don't know, I don't want to use the word bullied, maybe that wasn't the proper terminology, but she was being harassed by another person in her class, and she reached up and she snatched a necklace from her neck and broke it. Mm-hmm. And immediately, ill luck beset the person who broke the necklace. And then upon, talking to family and all that, they found out that it was supposed to be the vessel of a powerful Jinn who was supposed to protect the family, I guess. And so
it was protecting him.
Breaking that necklace, they had unleashed this Jinn unintentionally.
Well, funny you should mention that. I'm an eBayer. I love to go to eBay. I buy, sell stuff all the time. Just for fun, go to eBay and type Jinn ring. Oh my gosh. You will find all kinds of alleged rings that are possessed by genies or jinns. I thought that was very interesting. And some of these things are selling for like $300, $400, $500 or more. It's just, I'm sorry, but kind of absurd, I think.
I know you're not a big podcast listener, but one of the ones I listen to is My Brother, and Me. And they have Haunted Doll Watch that they do, where they find these haunted dolls and they'll sort of read the listing and kind of make fun of it. So maybe that could be our thing. We can do, Jinn ring, alerts or something like that.
Hey, y'all, there's a new one that's posted. Now, taking the discussion just a step further, the first reference to 3 wishes. In another story from Arabian Nights, a fisherman actually discovers this brass vessel, described as what we will call a lamp, and he opens it. A gigantic evil jinn by the name of Asmodeus immediately pops out. After being trapped for 400 years, Asmodeus wasn't in the greatest of moods, so he reveals he has a long, thought about how to reward or punish the one that freed him from this prison. One of his ideas, it says in the story, was to grant the person 3 wishes. Instead, however, in the story, he lets the fisherman choose how he will be killed.
Well, that's nice.
Slightly different twist there. This seems to be the earliest specific reference I could at least find to 3 wishes being granted from a freed genie.
Now, is that, as any good DM, when you get the wish spell, you find the best way to corrupt it? The Wishmaster movie where each wish is corrupted.
Wishmasters.
Is that, maybe that's the earliest form of that. Like, I'm going to give you a wish. You can only wish for your own death, but...
Yeah, there's your wish. My players in Dungeons and Dragons, occasionally I've had genie lamps pop up, and of course, what's the number one wish? I don't know if you've ever done this, but
you wish for more wishes.
Wish for more wishes, yes. And it's like, okay, this is broken. This can't be. Well, you can, if you put yourself in a prison genie state of mind that's been there for 400 years, and this sap fishes you up out of the ocean or whatever and rubs your lamp and sets you free, and then they say, I'll give you 3 wishes, buddy. Thanks for rescuing me. Yeah, I want another 1,000 wishes, buddy.
So he fishes you up out of the ocean and rubs your lamp. That sounds like a euphemism. That's
PG. Now, reference to a ring or a lamp. Back to Aladdin. In the original tale, Aladdin is recruited by a sorcerer to retrieve an oil lamp from a magic cave filled with traps. The sorcerer gives Aladdin a ring that's supposed to protect him in this cave. Far into his journey, Aladdin starts to fret, and he rubs his hands together, and a genie pops out of the ring and whisks Aladdin back home, oil lamp in tow. Now, Aladdin's mother sees the lamp as dirty, and of course, what's she decide to do? Rub it to clean it. And another more powerful genie pops out and appears, this one bound to do the bidding of whoever holds the lamp. Aladdin becomes rich and powerful. The sorcerer comes back to stir up trouble. People die, other people live happily ever after, so on and so forth. It's a little different than the Walt Disney version, but that is the original story of Aladdin.
The Disneyfied version. So.
Disneyfied, I like that word. Now, obviously, Disney took a few liberties with the story, and so just like the past, it stands to reason these liberties can alter the whole conception of the origin. You see how that works. Just in our time frame, if you mention it like to my kids or my grandkids, they're going to go back to the Aladdin Walt Disney version.
Well, to be honest, if you say the word gin, most people aren't going to associate that with anything.
Yeah, I mean...
It's a drink.
Right. I'll have a gin and tonic. And honestly, even I Dream of Jeannie and stuff, we're kind of getting out of the age. I know I Dream of Jeannie, but that was even an early show for me with my age.
Yeah, I was going to say I Dream of Jeannie was in reruns.
Yeah, total reruns, black and white,
I did watch it, though.
I did, too.
Jeannie was hot.
Yeah, she was hot. Nice little outfit. Regardless of what you wish to believe, or if you want to believe, the Jinn have been part of our ancestral stories for thousands of years, and it doesn't look like they're going away anytime soon.
So, I didn't feel like we'd be doing justice to what we do here if we didn't try to find some actual encounters with the Jinn that were documented.
Oh, love it.
Now, you and I talked previous to sitting down, and I will say most of these documented encounters with Jinn, the first thing I found was in relation to mental health, that it was seen as a mental health thing if you thought you were plagued by Jinn or taunted by Jinn. And so there are actual volumes of psychiatric lore dedicated to the treatment of people who believe they're being, plagued by Jinn.
And I mean, that makes sense that maybe their defenses are a little lower, so the Jinn feel like, they're better victims, or maybe their minds are just a little more open to it.
Another huge part of it, honestly, they seemed like ghost stories to me. And so I'm trying to say, like, do you look at those as if the ghost stories are stories of Jinn, or do you look at them from the Western viewpoint of like, oh, that was a ghost story?
Goes back to the whole translation. Yeah, maybe we've been calling it a ghost, but maybe it was actually a Jinn.
So here I picked out just 3 anecdotes that I kind of liked that weren't your typical ghost story type, and I didn't feel were, documents of mental illness. None of these are my stories, and they were all sort of related as anecdotes online, so I don't have a lot of detail on some of them. The first story was related to the storyteller that they had a great uncle who had gone to visit family that lived in India. And since it was summertime, it was hot outside, in night, I think it gets a little cooler. So the idea was they would all sleep in the courtyard out under the stars. He'd never been there before. He thought that would be a nice experience.
Right.
So his cousins told him, okay, we can do that. And then sort of indicated one particular corner of the courtyard and said, but don't sleep there. There's a Jinn that sleeps there, and you can't disturb that corner. Anytime that corner was disrupted at night, apparently strange events plagued the household for a day or two.
That definitely sounds ghost-like.
Yeah, very ghost-like. So, of course, he does what any good, I'm going to say, American would do, because I think he was Indian-American. But he decides he's going to sleep in that corner anyway.
Screw you, Jen. This is my corner.
So one night, he wakes up in the opposite corner of the courtyard. He doesn't know what's going on.
Excuse me.
He just assumes that it's his cousin's messing with him. So the following night, the same thing happens. He wakes up on the opposite side of the courtyard. So the next day, he writes a note, puts it on his pillow, telling his cousins to stop pranking him. He just wants to sleep. That night, he's pushed off the bed, and all of his bedding is thrown across the courtyard. He witnesses this.
I've about had enough of this.
And a note is thrown into his lap stating simply, I sleep here. No one else is awake.
Yeah, that definitely sounds ghostly / demonic almost.
Yeah. There's another story from the Sudan where the storyteller was, they lived there when they were young, and they lived on a family farm. And they relate this as like the most peaceful, perfect time of their life, which I think we all like to believe that our childhood is the best part.
Yeah.
So one day they're coming home, and the storyteller sees a fire in the house. Well, they get concerned.
Uh-oh.
As they get closer, they see that the fire is shaped like a human being. And it kind of walks around the house for a few steps here and there. Nothing in the home catches fire.
That's odd.
And then it just suddenly disappears. So did they see an Ifrit? Who knows?
Well, now, funny that you mentioned that because, and again, I shamelessly plug D&D, but I mean, an Ifrit in the game Dungeons and Dragons, I mean, even coming in proximity will melt flesh and even metal. So that's a weird one.
And finally, this last one is very ghost story-like, but I kind of liked it. This was related by the storyteller's grandfather. He apparently would walk to other towns and villages to visit family. And he'd stayed really late into the night visiting relatives in another town, and they were like, no, it's so late. You need to stay with us. And he's like, well, no, I'd really like to get home, just sleep in my own bed. I know it's late, but I'm not too worried about it. So he starts walking home, and he crosses through some fields and some woodlands while he's traveling. And after a while, he just feels like he's going in circles. He just keeps seeing the same thing over and over. He feels like he's somehow gotten lost in the darkness. And he comes across what appears to be a middle-aged woman. And she claims to be a local, but he's never seen her before. And mind you, he's in a different village, so maybe he doesn't know everybody. But he definitely never met her before. And he said, well, can you help me out? I feel like I've gotten lost somewhere here in the night. And she's like, oh, yes, no, I can help you. Just follow me. And so he starts following her down the path. Well, he's a smoker, and you don't often hear of smoking saving lives, but in this particular case. So he lights up a cigarette. And when he strikes the match to light up the cigarette, the surroundings change. Like everything around him suddenly just looks different. And this woman just disappears. And he is definitely somewhere he's never been before. So he starts screaming for help. He's like, none of this is familiar. He doesn't know where he's at. Some locals find him. They bring him out, of wherever this wilderness that he was in. They bring him to safety. And they're like, you understand you almost died, right? And he's like, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, we have a Jinn locally that will take people who get lost and lead them down a path. He said, if you'd have continued down that path, it actually ends in a cliff.
Oh, wow.
And you're not going to see that cliff until it's too late.
Ooh.
So apparently she was leading people off cliffs. Now, and that sounds very much like a Western ghost story.
Yes.
So it's one of those things, like a lot of them have that sort of ghost story sound to them when you listen to them from our Westernized viewpoint. So
definitely. So maybe when we do paranormal investigations, maybe we need to throw in the Jinn name occasionally, or wish
kind of
maybe on it. I'm not sure.
I don't want to fiddle around with wishes. Now, we did talk about this. You talked about Solomon, and I think you referenced Suleiman.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I talked about having that book of ritual magic that I had in an earlier podcast, but it had the keys of Solomon and stuff like that. There were spells for the binding and manipulation of Jinn, but, I never attempted any of those. It seemed like something that even...
A little bit...
that might have been too much, but okay.
Close to the edge.
But even if I didn't, even if I thought they were going to work, is that really the ones I want to...
Oh, right.
I want to call and summon forth these
Is a wish really worth it?
Yeah. I don't want some of these elemental spirits that could destroy me.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this adventure of Arabian Nights and genies in particular. Another tale you'll find on Nightmares on the Lost Highway. We leave the tarnished old lamp in your hands. Wish wisely and carefully, my friends. Thanks for listening.
So Eric picked this ridiculous idea for a podcast.
And Bill has cursed me for it. He says he has one sentence.
I sent a Jinn after you. I shouldn't joke about that.
Would like to give a shout out to our first paying sponsor, Raven's Loft. That's our family shop here located in Lebanon, Missouri. It's your one-stop gaming, vintage toy, and collectible shop where you can find Star Wars, Transformers, G.I. Joe, comics, vinyl records, role-play gaming, Magic the Gathering, and so much more. We're located here at 223 West Commercial, downtown Lebanon, and also in our second location, also here in Lebanon at the Heartland Antique Mall. We'd like to thank Raven's Loft for again supporting Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
I want to take a time to thank the people that helped bring this all together. Alex Tudor, you can almost call him our producer at this point. Sarah Tudor, who also helps with some of the technical stuff. I want to take a moment to extend thanks to Eric for letting us use his space to record in, kind of our makeshift studio.
I, in turn, would like to thank Bill for, one, putting up with me and using this camaraderie to do something we both very much love and enjoy doing, and thank Bill's family for allowing him to spend all the time to work and clean up our recordings and present them in what you hear in the final terms, the final edition, if you will.
And I'd like to thank all of you for continuing to listen. I know we've got some loyal followers out there. We do this as a labor of love, but we're happy that there are people that enjoy it hopefully as much as we do.
Thank you very much.